Thank you. I'd like to just ask questions to follow up from a couple of questions I asked in March around Ehrlichiosis.
Sorry?
That your staff know. It's the...
No, you didn't hear.
Oh, Ehrlichiosis.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
yes. We're talking about the dog illness?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And, hello.
Other kind of dogs.
Yeah.
Dr. Martin is the expert.
Hello, Dr. Martin. Because last estimates, the Chief Veterinary Officer put the number of dogs affected at 400 with the mortality rate of 10%. However, the anecdotal evidence we've received on the grounds puts this much higher. Do you have an update on those figures?
Yes, Senator. So Robin Martin, First Assistant Secretary, Biosecurity Animal Division. We know that about 1,500 animals have been tested, and about 500 of those, or 520, tested positive. The mortality rate, I understand, is around 10%. So they're sort of the latest figures that we have.
Okay, since then. And just in terms of the Northern Territory, there's no permanent veterinary capacity in our remote communities, so data relies on private practitioners to get samples, but they may only visit communities a couple of times a year. What are you able to do about this discrepancy between your data and some of the anecdotal data on the ground?
Senator, certainly through Animal Health Committee, which is made up of all the state and territory chief veterinary officers and also the Commonwealth chief veterinary officer, this issue about ehrlichiosis is continuing to be discussed. With getting information from private veterinarians or other sources, then that does rely on that information going to the state or territory veterinary officer. So there definitely are, with these things, sometimes, insufficient data.
Well, so you've given 520 dogs have tested positive. Where would they be?
Those dogs were mostly tested in the Northern Territory and Western Australia, so in the north of Kimberley region.
So are you, in terms of ehrlichiosis, can you just explain to the committee, is this a really serious concern in terms of this risk to the broader community, or is it just another challenge that you have to deal with?
Ehrlichiosis is a disease of dogs, so it's spread via the ticks. So it is obviously a serious disease in dogs. The strain that we have here is most closely related to what's called an Asian strain. There's no evidence that has infected people, but I think we discussed, or Dr. Shipp discussed last thing about AMRIC, which is the animal management in rural and remote Indigenous communities. They've put forward a proposal to do some surveillance in those communities, and that's being discussed through the Department of Health. And I know that Dr. Shipp has met with AMRIC, and he's also met with the Chief Medical Officer. That proposal through the Department of Health has gone to the Communicable Diseases Network, which is the public health officials, and so that's they're going to now sort of come and discuss that with the Department of Agriculture.
Dr. Martin, AMRIC is seeking funding in terms of a program in Kalgoorlie, Beswick and Barunga to take blood samples from humans and dogs to screen for zoonosis. that's around $300,000. Is that program going to be funded?
So that's the proposal that the Department of Health has been discussing with the CDNA, that's the public health group, and then because they also wish to take samples from dogs, then they're discussing that with the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and also we'll need to discuss it through the State and Territory Chief Veterinary Officers. So that proposal is under active discussion.
And is it seen as a matter of urgency to understand if there is infection between dogs and humans as a result of this tick?
I think probably you'd need to talk to sort of Department of Health from sort of public health. Certainly, the testing that I talked about was, that were more samples tested to understand what the prevalence might be within the Northern Territory and WA.
So this would be the first opportunity for those samples to be taken in relation to that link between dogs and humans?
Yes, that's my understanding, that there hasn't been. But as I mentioned, we don't have any evidence that this strain is a zoonotic thing, but there is some limited evidence about a South American strain that may be a zoonotic, so it can infect people as well.
But isn't that the whole point of taking the samples? So
That's AMREC's proposal, yes, to look at whether there is. And also, I don't think it's solely related to Ehrlichiosis canis. It's also looking at whether there might be other vector-borne diseases.
And I noticed that the budget doesn't have any funding for AMREC. Is there any reason for that?
Sorry,
the federal budget. There hasn't been any, as I understand it, there hasn't been any further funding for AMREC. Mr. McCarthy, I mean, by all means, take the question on notice.
No, look, there's not, to my knowledge, any specific funding. So in the biosecurity space, is that where you're talking?
Correct,
because that's
yes.
all I can respond to, so no.
Okay, all right. Mr. Metcalfe, is there anything you wanted to add?
I was just saying, while there might be nothing specific in this budget, there's a huge amount of sort of resourcing that sits in the department on these issues, Senator. So,
all right. Look, I will continue to raise it when we don't know, in the absence of that evidence around whether there is a link between dogs and humans, given that it's in the concerns are largely in the north, and we know, in particular in our First Nations communities, the high rates of morbidity and also all the other sicknesses that First Nations people have to deal with. It's just of real concern if there is a connection in terms of dogs and humans.
Absolutely understand, Senator, very important point you make, and I know that the experts, Dr. Martin and the Chief Vet and others are very focused on that.
Yeah,
okay.
So it certainly is being given active consideration, and although I know it seems a bit slow, the process, it certainly is making its way through all the relevant groups for consideration about what's the best approach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Over to you, Raph.